which, like I told you last time, that Westerners don't really appreciate or understand. But in a lot of these cultures, they respond to force. They don't respond to, they don't respond to negotiations I think if Israel was not responding as strongly as they were, Hezbollah would have invaded by now in the north. I think it's only because Israel is showing a very, very strong response that Hezbollah is, backing up and not doing anything worse. But again, I don't know. I don't know all the calculations. I'm sure that's part of it.
I told you that yesterday. I watched the whole interview, 90 minutes, with a scholar on Islam, and he makes a rather convincing case that historically Islam is actually a religion of peace, and that the Jewish faith and Muslim faith have a lot in common. That they have more in common than the Jewish faith and Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this, that the Jews under the Ottoman Empire did much better than they did under Christian Europe, for sure. That's for sure. But that changed in 1948. That changed in the,
But what exactly changed there then? Like, people woke up and thought, okay, if the Germans can do it, we can do it too, or what changed? You say they lived in peace, and I believe you for a very long time, and then all of a sudden, oh no, let's kill them.
Well, because I think Britain before, during World War One stoked the nationalist feelings among the Arabs, just like they did with the Jews with the Balfour Declaration. And I think at that point, the Arabs were much more empowered and much more felt that they deserved their own places and they deserved their own land. And I'm sure they didn't want the Jews coming in. I'm sure they didn't want to have the Jews be settling in this land that they wanted for themselves. I have no doubt about it. I'm sure that it's because the Jews were coming that the Arabs got upset. I don't think that that's
so essentially it's a conflict over land.
I think from their perspective, it's a conflict over land. I think from the Jewish
perspective,
they just wanted to be here. We didn't start any conflict. That's exactly what I keep on saying. We were not conflicted. We were conflicting with the British. Yes, there was a conflict with the British when we wanted the British were not letting people move here, and people were dying in the Holocaust because England wasn't letting them emigrate to Israel, to Palestine. Yeah, so that there was a big conflict with the British, but we accepted the UN partition. Israel and we didn't say no. We're going to fight for every bit of land. We're going to fight for Gaza. We're going to fight for Transjordan. We didn't do that. That's not what happened. That wasn't until 1967
you know more about this than me, of course. So please tell me, what exactly was that deal that you accepted, that Israel accepted?
There was an earlier version which we didn't even speak about, the Peel Commission. This was still when it was under Britain. But in 1947, the UN voted. There was a UN vote whether to partition the state of the state of what was then Palestine, whether to partition it into two things. I showed you the map. It was a very ugly map, a messy map, right, with the three different plots of land. And Israel was going to get the coastal region in the north and the desert in the south. And the Arabs were going to get what's today the West Bank, Gaza, and a big chunk of the north of Israel. And that's the world voted on that, a partition to the UN. The world accepted the plan. If they would have voted it down, I don't know what would have happened today, but they didn't. They accepted it. The UN ratified it as this is what we're going to do, and the Jews accepted it. They accepted it. That's it. They were very excited and happy to finally have their own place. I told you, for those few years, 1945 to 1948, 49, those are few years where there was a lot of sympathy to the Jews because everyone saw what happened in the Holocaust and people saw how many people were killed and that nobody helped them and nobody took them into their countries, etc. The world, and I told you also, there were about 1 million people in displaced person camp all over Europe that had nowhere to go. So the world saw that there was a need to establish a place for these Jewish people to go. So the world accepted it, and the Arabs didn't. That's where it started. I mean, the violence didn't start then, but the current situation that we have today started in 19. If they would have just said yes, if the Arabs would have just said, okay, we'll accept it. We're not happy about it, but we'll accept it. So then we would have two states. They would be living side by side, and there would have been no wars. But the war hasn't stopped since 1948.
I think the liberal view there is that there's this idea that land was stolen, and that they should have just accepted this. Like, we lost land to these incoming Jews,
But again, it wasn't
and
their
we
land. It
should
was the
accept that.
Ottoman land. It wasn't
Yes,
theirs.
I
It was the
know. Yes, I know.
Ottomans
But
and then the British. And then,
I'm explaining
no,
how
okay, yes,
people
they
view
use
this.
all these
People
words. They
view
call it
this
colonial. I
this
know, but
way.
it's wrong. It's
Yeah.
just wrong. I understand that people say it, but
Hmm.
it's false. It's
Well,
a
I want to hear from you again that
yes.
at that point, no land was stolen.
Land was not stolen. The Jewish people that were, again, it was Britain. It was a British colony. It was Britain could have kicked out or let in anybody that they wanted to. Then the world decided, they drew up a map, and the world and the UN voted that this is how we're going to divide up the land. Nobody was told if they were Arabs living in the Jewish part, you're going to have to leave. That didn't happen until today. There are many Arabs who didn't leave, and we have
Hmm.
2+ million Arabs still that
Hmm.
are here, right?
Hmm.
That's exactly how it happened. Then afterwards, this we spoke about the first time, between 1948 and 1967. So then, yes, then there were places that were chased out. There were people that were killed or wiped out. And again, there's two sides to that. I'm telling you that some things were done that are not conscionable and not acceptable at all, but not all of it. There were places that were attacking, and the Israelis had to defend themselves against a village that was overlooking the highway, and they had to, you know, fight that village away and get those people out of there because they were constantly killing our people. So it was an ongoing battle that was happening. And yes, during that time period, there were people that were kicked out, but not systematically. There was no ethnic cleansing. The only people that were ethnically cleansed are the Jews. And I keep on telling you this, that in 1948, not a single Jew was left in Jerusalem. Not a single Jew was left in the entire West Bank. Not a
Hmm.
single one. And then we never even spoke about this whole part of it, that in those years from 1948 to the early 1950s, over 850,000 Jews were expelled or chased out of every Arab country, from Lebanon, from Egypt, from Syria, from Iraq, from Morocco, from Yemen. There were 850,000 Jews that were literally chased out and expelled. Now, yes, there were times, there's a very famous thing called the Lavon affair, and maybe your people will tell you, oh, but the Zionists did it to themselves
Yeah, that's
because
what I
there
was
was,
thinking.
okay, there's one situation that happened in Egypt where the Zionists did like a false flag attack and they bombed a movie theater. Yes, that happened, but that was one situation in one town out of 850,000 people. Speak to people like Gad Saad. I don't know, do you know who he is?
Mm-hmm.
God said he's like he was born in Lebanon. His parents were in Lebanon for generations, and they were literally chased out by the Palestinian, PLO when they moved into Lebanon, and literally chased out there and had to flee for their lives. I'll send you another video about a woman who also had the exact same experience, a Lebanese woman who grew up a Christian in Lebanon, and her family was almost totally killed until the Israelis saved her, and she was able to then move to Israel and then to America. She was not even Jewish; she was Christian, a Christian Arab. But there was 850,000 Jews that had been living in Arab countries for generations, hundreds and hundreds of years throughout the whole Ottoman Empire. How many Jews today live in Morocco? How many Jews live in Yemen? How many Jews live in Iraq? How many Jews live in Egypt? How many Jews live in any of these places? A handful now, a small, tiny handful of people. What happened to all those Jews? They were kicked
Mm-hmm.
out. They were literally kicked out. More Jews lost their homes, literally, more Jews lost their homes and their businesses and their valuables and their property in all the Arab countries than Palestinians that were kicked out of Israel.
Mm-hmm. And
Literally, there's no
again,
question about that.
and again, this is because the British stoked up this nationalism, because
No,
before
after 1948 and the war, so then there was a huge tide of anti-Semitism at that point,
Mhm.
and people they just turned on the Jews, even though these are Jews that were in the Lebanese army, Jews that were in the armies for these other countries. They were good citizens for hundreds of years, and there was a massive wave of anti-Semitism that swept through the Arab world at that time. Literally, you could look all of this up. Nobody
Mhm.
contests this. This is the only thing they'll
Well,
contest is,
people
look,
contest this, of course.
well, no,
Everything is
they
contested. Everything.
well, again,
I told
not
you the
not
only.
historically, not
I told you.
historically.
Yeah, okay.
People who don't know anything, they'll
Okay.
say this, but not
Well, yeah.
the
You
history
know,
of
the
this is
only
clear.
thing I'm really an expert on is the American Civil War, and
The Civil War, yes,
anything is contested.
yes.
You have people saying that Grant is a butcher, and you have people saying that Grant is a military genius. So everything is always contested.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine, but the historical record of the fact that Jews had lived for hundreds and hundreds of years throughout the entire Ottoman Empire and all those Arab countries, and Turkey, again, all those countries, and now there are no Jews in those countries. So something happened, right? Something happened. And it wasn't just that they were, excited and Zionistic and they left. Many of them were patriotic and connected to their companies. They left. They left with nothing. They left all their property behind and their businesses behind. And they weren't like nomadic, Bedouins. They were people with companies and with homes and businesses and everything, and they were chased out of their countries.
Oh yeah, the anti-Israeli view is that the Zionists kind of orchestrated this, but you're telling me that this is not the case, no?
No. There was one famous thing, and this is what they point to: the Lavon affair that took place in Egypt. But that was not the cause of 850,000 Jews leaving their countries all around the Arab world. Absolutely not. Some of them leave voluntarily. I'm sure some of them, now that there was Israel, they were excited to come and move to Israel. I'm sure some of them did, right? But not the vast majority of them. These are people that lived there for generations. And that's why Israel, you have the half of the country are Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews, who originally came from Spain. But like you said, after the Inquisition in the 1400s, late 1400s, they left and they moved into the Ottoman Empire, and they were living there since the 1500s. For 400 years, they were living in the Arab lands, and then they, were literally kicked out. And until today, all of those countries, like I left on the voice note today, you can't even set foot in that country as a Jew. They won't let you. You can't an Israeli passport. They won't let you into the country. Nobody seems to care about that. It's only the Israel who's ethnically cleansing when we've got 2 million Arabs here and not a single Jew in those countries. But somehow or another, the world, it's us who are the bad guys somehow. I don't, I don't know.
I think I remember landing in Tel Aviv, and they give you this stamp in your passport, and I think you could refuse if it could get you into trouble.
Exactly. Yes, correct. So now they stopped. They don't stamp anymore. Now it's all digital, because if you had a stamp of Tel Aviv, they wouldn't let you into our Arab countries. Exactly.
My girlfriend at the time was Iranian, and I think she refused because she wouldn't be able to travel to Iran if she had been to Israel or something.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. That's, you know what I mean? These are facts. That's a fact. But I mean, they literally won't let a person who came to Israel into their countries. They don't recognize Israel until today. Most of those countries don't recognize that Israel is a state. They don't recognize us as as an existence. They're still in the war since 1948. Literally, that's the case with Iraq. That's the case. Egypt, we made peace. Lebanon, Jordan, rather, we made peace. But Syria, Lebanon, all those other countries, until the Abraham Accords, right? The Abraham Accords, that's Morocco and the UAE. That was a huge breakthrough. That was a huge, change in the world. But until then, all of those countries refused to accept that Israel even existed. And the world doesn't seem to care about that. They didn't just care that you've got a billion people in all of those countries that refuse to recognize that we have a right to exist. You know what I mean? That's just how the world has been.
And what is their argumentation there? Like, there must be some kind of argumentation. They don't just say we don't recognize Israel. Like, what is their reason? Their official reason?
Yes, they do. They say we are colonial. We're a throwback to the colonial, days, and we have no business to be here, no right to be here, and they don't recognize that we have a right to be here. That's it.
Well, I think when people see what Israel does in the West Bank, that many people,
but this is going back. The West Bank wasn't until 19.
They agree
talk
that
about the first
colonialism.
30 years of the country when there was no West Bank, right? It was like this before 1967. That's why that's a bogus argument, because until 1967 there was no West Bank. Jordan had the West Bank, and all of these things were the same. So that's baloney. That's the same thing with the blockade. Why it's baloney? Because all of this existed before all of this. That's what I keep on saying. There was all of this. The genocidal war wasn't because of the blockade or the occupation. The not allowing the Jews in those countries has nothing to do with the blockade or the occupation. All of those things only came later, much later. So now that's what they'll point to, because now it's a convenient thing to point to. But it's a lie, because it existed before that happened.